The grand tale instantly ignites in a blinding flash of mysterious light as a new narrative forcefully takes shape. Inside the dark castle, the Demon King ominously cradles a captive while 4 high-level intruders relentlessly approach his throne. As the oppressive tension mounts, the 3 female and 1 male intruders continue their unyielding march toward the brooding monarch. Dismissing the imminent threat, he casually evaluates the formidable party consisting of an elite paladin, a fierce martial artist, and a skilled healer. A terse agreement heavily echoes through the pitch-black chamber as the masters of the castle grimly brace for conflict. Scoffing at the repetitive foolishness of humanity, the dark denizens arrogantly await the encroaching, overconfident heroes. Utterly bored by the weak-looking arrivals, the languid companion boldly asks to sleep through the impending, trivial skirmish. Deep in sudden contemplation, a heavy sense of disbelief forcefully washes over the reality of their bizarre and unexpected predicament. With calm and chilling assurance, a dark promise is made to wake the slumbering companion once the human intruders finally breach the inner sanctum. A jarring wave of melancholy nostalgia hits hard as fond memories of a once sweet boy contrast sharply with his current dark reign. Heavy silence violently suffocates the air, steadily building an unbearable tension before the impending storm of action utterly breaks. The stifling atmosphere dangerously thickens with unspoken dread as the inevitable, bloody confrontation looms ever closer to reality. Panicking mid-flight, the desperate fairies realize with absolute horror that a relentless human pursuer is effortlessly matching their incredible speed. Stumbling frantically through the desperate escape, a terrified voice urgently checks on their struggling, completely exhausted companion. A sudden, electrifying shock brutally rips through the chaotic skies as disaster viciously strikes without a single warning. Utter confusion and blinding terror instantly erupt when a piercing cry of alarm utterly shatters their brief, fragile moment of respite. Desperation fiercely fuels their rapid ascent as they urgently attempt to soar far beyond the dangerous, grasping reach of the human below. Imminent tragedy deeply threatens the fragile escape as the newborn fairy rapidly loses the crucial stamina required to survive the grueling flight. With the terrifying human closing in incredibly fast, pure panic completely sets in as they desperately scream for Eleanor to fly higher. Faced with impossible and deadly odds, a sudden, immensely risky decision is swiftly forged in the blistering heat of the chase. A breathtaking, heart-stopping moment of silent sacrifice unfolds majestically in the perilous, open skies above. Blowing a deeply tragic whistle of farewell, a selfless hero desperately begs their friends to flee and survive the coming slaughter. The devastating sacrifice heavily hangs suspended in agonizing time, permanently cementing a heartbreaking and utterly brutal separation. A chilling, suffocating sense of doom immediately descends as the relentless human captor finally snatches their elusive, helpless prey from the air. Plunging rapidly into an endless abyss of darkness, the defeated captive's mind slowly and inevitably slips into absolute oblivion. A heavy, resounding thud violently echoes as consciousness abruptly snaps into a completely bizarre and highly alien reality. Awakening with a violent jolt, the staggering realization swiftly dawns that a miraculous and completely impossible reincarnation has actually occurred. Pure shock fiercely courses through their veins upon instantly recognizing this new world as the very dating sim RPG they once obsessively played. Frantic memories of the massive multi-ending fantasy game vividly flood back, perfectly recalling its complex, gender-bending romance mechanics. The deeply traumatic memory of a fatal truck accident in their past life violently and painfully resurfaces in their fragile mind. A dizzying, nauseating wave of existential dread heavily washes over as the crushing, undeniable weight of their new reincarnation firmly takes hold. The crucial, terrifying role of Eleanor, the helper fairy who actively recruits the hero to save a dying world, suddenly becomes crystal clear. Absolute, paralyzing horror brutally strikes with the undeniable revelation of being reincarnated as Eleanor, the highly romanceable helper fairy. Groaning in intense, agonizing confusion, the newly awakened Eleanor desperately tries to make sense of her harsh and deeply painful surroundings. A heavy, suffering moan violently escapes as the lingering trauma of capture and brutal reincarnation throbs relentlessly through her tiny body. Blinking fiercely against the oppressive gloom, the utterly terrifying sight of a restrictive silver cage comes into sharp, undeniable focus. A dark, horrifying realization forcefully hits that surviving as a captive fairy requires a grim and incredibly dangerous alternative to losing her precious wings. Staring in sheer, unadulterated disbelief, Eleanor violently recoils from the terrifying, ominous liquid rapidly surrounding her fragile form. A sudden, blood-curdling scream of pure terror sharply pierces the damp air as an unseen, terrifying threat violently jolts the silver cage. With a deeply menacing and chilling declaration, a sinister new chapter of brutal captivity mercilessly and undeniably begins. Furiously glaring at her surroundings, Eleanor curses humans for putting such a dangerous-looking liquid near her cage. Staring into the gloom, the captive fairy angrily questions the true identity of the person who forcefully locked her away. Carefully observing her environment, she desperately tries to make sense of the strange and unfamiliar room. Wondering how much time has passed since losing consciousness, she silently watches the sleeping boy who captured her. Slowly stirring from his slumber, the mysterious boy casually asks his tiny prisoner if she is finally awake. Groggily wishing for 5 more minutes of sleep, he cheerfully greets her as a human and asks how she is feeling. Annoyed by his casual nonchalance, Eleanor sharply retorts that she wouldn't have minded if he had slept a bit longer. Shrugging off her fierce attitude, the boy forces himself to get up and properly address his new captive. Glaring at her captor, Eleanor realizes the boy acts exactly like a child desperately trying to imitate a mature adult. A sudden spark of recognition hits her as she wonders if this oddly familiar boy is a character from the video game. Politely checking on her condition, he explains that he healed her injuries and asks if anything still feels wrong. Maintaining his extremely formal demeanor, he respectfully asks for permission to introduce himself to the trapped fairy. Refusing to play along, Eleanor fiercely demands an apology first, declaring that a simple apology wouldn't excuse the death penalty. Ignoring her fiery outburst, he welcomes her to his home and slowly reveals his name as Isekai'd. With a confident and polite smile, he formally introduces himself as the esteemed court mage, Isekai'd. Coughing awkwardly to regain her composure, the captive fairy reluctantly introduces herself simply as Eleanor. Feeling completely ignored when he casually invites her to call him Stylus, she realizes she really shouldn't have forgotten him. Recalling the game's dark lore, Eleanor notes that humans usually capture fairies to forcefully drain their magic or enslave them. Confronting him directly, she aggressively demands to know exactly what he wants now that he has caught her. Lewis nonchalantly assures her that she doesn't need to worry about any forced obedience or painful magic extraction. Trembling slightly, Eleanor grimly reflects that if she weren't a reincarnated human, she might have already taken her own life. Shocking her completely, he casually mentions that he simply needs her to stay there as a decorative pet for a few hundred years. Sensing something extremely off about her modern demeanor, Lewis suspiciously questions if she is truly the fairy Eleanor. He chillingly clarifies that he didn't catch fairies indiscriminately, but specifically targeted only her for his mysterious plans. Noting that the Eleanor he knew spoke much more politely, he confidently asserts that this is indeed their very first meeting. Testing her hidden knowledge, the young mage cryptically asks if she is at all familiar with a specific set of words. Utter panic instantly washes over Eleanor's face as she fearfully braces for whatever he is about to say. Dropping a massive bombshell, Lewis slowly and deliberately says the exact title, The Demon King and the Hourglass. Utterly shocked, Eleanor frantically demands to know how he knows that title, entirely confirming his suspicion about her true identity. Smirking at her explosive reaction, Lewis calmly concludes that they are exactly the same, leaving the fairy in absolute disbelief. He smoothly explains that since she inherently knows the game, it will be incredibly easy to explain his own bizarre reincarnation. With chilling calmness, Lewis confesses that he is actually the specific character destined to become the final Demon King. Eleanor instantly remembers Lewis as the top-tier mage who infiltrates the hero's party only to brutally betray them at the end. The terrifying realization finally clicks into place as she fully comprehends the catastrophic danger of being trapped with Isekai'd. Lewis admits he only knows the game because his older sister endlessly obsessed over the wildly popular final boss Demon King. Revealing his calculated master plan, he explains he secured Eleanor to forcefully stop her from ever recruiting the hero. Despite his destined immense power, Lewis shockingly admits that he is still absolutely terrified of dying in the future. Trapped in her restrictive silver cage, Eleanor groans in extreme boredom, desperately wishing he would at least let her out. 3 utterly monotonous days slowly pass with the bizarre boy showing absolutely no intention of releasing his tiny captive. Suddenly, a mysterious magical array violently glows nearby, abruptly shattering the lingering, mind-numbing boredom of her dark captivity. A glowing magical array suddenly fades as Eleanor stutters in sheer surprise. A startling realization hits her that Stylus isn't the only one living in the dark, oppressive house. From a separate room, a weak, lonely voice desperately begs for someone to come home soon. The faint, echoing voice softly and repeatedly calls out for Stylus. Surprised by her sharp hearing, the young mage confirms that a girl is indeed inside the house with them. Eleanor frustratedly admits to him that she still cannot escape her restrictive silver cage. Puzzled by the sudden revelation, she urgently questions him about the mysterious girl. Startled by the grim reality, Eleanor frantically asks if there are any responsible adults around to supervise the child. She aggressively presses the issue, mentioning the terrible coughing she heard and demanding to know who cares for the sick girl. Lewis bluntly reveals their parents are dead, leaving absolutely no one else to take them in. Eleanor struggles to comprehend how two young children are surviving entirely on their own. He coldly explains that this fantasy world lacks the developed welfare systems of their past lives in Japan. Lewis lays out their grim reality of having only a house, a breadwinning eldest brother, and a sickly younger sister. Despite acknowledging their civilized survival as a blessing, Eleanor deeply worries for the little girl left alone all day. Gently stroking the cage, Lewis softly reveals his fragile little sister's name is Lumina. He grimly admits that Lumina is sadly accustomed to catching severe, debilitating colds. Eleanor praises his hidden kindness as he sharply warns her that holding onto the silver cage will make her sick. Lewis praises Lumina's fierce intelligence, noting she fully understands why he must leave her behind to work. Seizing a desperate opportunity, Eleanor proposes a bold deal to look after Lumina in exchange for accepting her captivity. Intrigued by the fairy's audacious offer, a heavy, thoughtful silence falls over the young mage. Finding the proposal highly tempting, Lewis formally promises to let Eleanor meet his sister once he mentally prepares himself. Bursting with pure joy, Eleanor victoriously escapes her cage a few days later. The narrative rapidly fast-forwards through the brief passage of time following their crucial agreement. Soaring excitedly through the air, the energetic fairy loudly declares her ultimate, hard-won liberation. She gleefully celebrates that while still confined to the study, Lewis has finally allowed her out of the restrictive cage. Her sudden, bold attempt to use magic is instantly and brutally rejected by the cautious mage. Eleanor suddenly remembers her character's inherent, game-breaking ability to cast powerful magic. Lewis smugly predicts her immediate escape attempt while she furiously denies even speaking her plan aloud. He coldly insists that letting such a valuable asset go would be a massive, unforgivable waste. Ignoring her desperate pleas, he calmly separates his dark destiny as the Demon King from his current desires. Utterly baffled, Eleanor frustratedly admits she cannot read the enigmatic boy's thoughts at all. A heavy, intense stare from Lewis violently halts her rebellious train of thought. Clenching her tiny fists, she stubbornly resolves to practice her magical abilities anyway. A terrifying, pitch-black aura suffocates the room whenever she daringly brings up the taboo topic of escape. She recalls hardcore challenge playthroughs from her past life where gamers specifically beat the game without her character. Those grueling challenges existed solely because Eleanor was designed as an unbelievably overpowered support fairy. Brimming with immense confidence, she proudly declares her true identity as a phenomenally strong entity. Deciding to completely ignore his strict rules, she rebelliously prepares to cast a spell entirely on her own. Visualizing her immense hidden potential, she realizes she can easily become an unstoppable powerhouse in this new world. Focusing her entire awareness, she violently pulls her raw mana together to unleash her very first spell. Absolute silence heavily suffocates the tense room as a highly anticipated magical attempt completely fails to manifest. Furious determination takes over as the tiny fairy desperately tries to summon another elemental spell. Enraged by her sudden impotence, Eleanor loudly demands to know why her fire magic cannot even conjure a pathetic wisp of smoke. Refusing to surrender, she forcefully attempts to command the raw power of earth. Pivoting swiftly in her desperation, the frustrated fairy furiously calls upon the roaring wind to obey her. Exhausting her final options, she frantically tries to summon a simple burst of water. Utterly defeated and physically drained, Eleanor miserably confesses her crushing, unbearable hunger. Complaining bitterly about her weakened state, the supposedly all-powerful fairy of salvation realizes something is terribly wrong. Lewis coldly reminds his stubborn captive that she should have honestly revealed her diet the moment he caught her. He casually points out that 3 agonizing weeks have already passed since her initial imprisonment. Reassuring her slightly, Lewis firmly states he only wants to keep her safe and harbors no intentions of conducting cruel fairy experiments. Locking his piercing eyes with hers, the young mage chillingly declares he will absolutely not release her under the current circumstances. Pressing the vital issue, he demands she honestly confess what she actually eats if starving is truly this unbearable. Piecing the magical mystery together, Lewis correctly deduces that fairies likely sustain themselves entirely on raw mana. Eleanor timidly confirms she must consume natural elements brimming with rich magical energy to survive. Startled by his sudden, unexpected movement, the nervous fairy frantically questions what the imposing mage is preparing to do. Formulating a dark and highly unconventional solution, Lewis quietly mutters that his dangerous idea just might work. Without a single moment of hesitation, the young mage sharply bites directly into his own finger to draw fresh blood. A crimson bead of blood slowly wells up as he deliberately presents his injured finger to the starving captive. Unnerved by her intense, predatory gaze, he casually remarks that her wildly hungry stare is genuinely terrifying. Utterly hypnotized by the mana-rich blood, Eleanor desperately craves a single taste of the offered, delicious nourishment. Smirking darkly at her feral desperation, Lewis mockingly asks if she truly desires his life force that badly. Torn violently between her lingering human morals and overwhelming fairy instincts, she fiercely hesitates to consume something so grotesquely abnormal. Lewis cruelly shatters her inner conflict by bluntly reminding the starving girl that she is no longer a human being. Giving in completely to the agonizing hunger, the tiny fairy finally leans toward the outstretched, bloody finger. Her delicate tongue eagerly touches the warm, crimson drop resting tantalizingly on his skin. A rich, explosive rush of pure, undiluted mana instantly floods her starving senses. Soft, frantic noises escape her trembling lips as she greedily devours the magical, life-saving sustenance. Completely overcome by the euphoric taste, she breathlessly admits the fresh blood is absolutely delicious. A sudden, violent shockwave unexpectedly tears through her tiny, fragile body. Pure panic instantly sets in as she horrifyingly realizes something internal is going terribly wrong. Oblivious to her sudden terrifying crisis, Lewis coldly asks if her monstrous appetite is finally satisfied. Searing agony violently forces the paralyzed fairy to collapse helplessly onto the cold surface of the wooden desk. Burning intensely from the inside out, she agonizingly cries out that her entire body feels incredibly hot. Blinding, explosive light violently erupts from her form as a massive magical surge forcefully triggers a sudden transformation. The intense, radiant flash completely engulfs the dark study in a brilliant, inescapable eruption of pure mana. Blinking away the rapidly fading light, the dazed Eleanor groggily lets out a deeply confused gasp. Staring in absolute disbelief, she frantically inspects her suddenly enlarged, completely human-sized hands. Utterly panicked by her sudden miraculous transformation, she frantically screams at a bewildered Lewis to immediately calm down. Struck by a horrifying realization, Eleanor completely understands that her surroundings didn't shrink, but she herself has terrifyingly grown to human proportions. Looking around in sheer disbelief, Eleanor realizes the massive bookshelves and the entire room have mysteriously shrunk. Realizing her perspective has drastically elevated without actually taking flight, a shocking and impossible truth begins to dawn on her. Lewis calmly observes that her delicate wings remain perfectly intact, confirming she hasn't entirely transformed into a human being. Staring frantically at her own hands, the bewildered fairy finally comprehends that her tiny body has rapidly grown to human proportions. Processing the impossible phenomenon, she desperately recalls that fairies usually achieve this massive size only by accumulating mana over hundreds of years. Frantically searching her past life memories of the game, she tries to pinpoint exactly how a magical fairy instantly becomes human-sized. Smirking knowingly, the young mage correctly deduces that she remembers the legendary, dangerous mechanic of forming a master-servant contract. Horrified by the terrifying implications, Eleanor fiercely rejects the idea of a binding contract that would violently force her into absolute servitude. Panicking internally, she desperately hopes that merely drinking his blood wasn't enough to magically forge an unbreakable master-servant bond. The terrifying realization utterly crushes her as she remembers the future Demon King's blood is overflowing with the most exquisite, dangerously potent mana. Lewis arrogantly questions if his blood was truly that appealing, while the overwhelmed fairy guiltily recalls its undeniably delicious, intoxicating taste. Shoving her mixed feelings aside, Eleanor excitedly celebrates her new towering height by gleefully pulling out a heavy chair and reading a book. Seizing the perfect opportunity, Lewis abruptly announces that his sick younger sister explicitly requested to finally meet the mysterious captive fairy. Utterly stunned, Eleanor gasps in shock as the boy reveals his sister somehow heard her desperately calling out his name through the walls. Confused by the sudden, bizarre turn of events, the bewildered fairy violently denies ever directly speaking a single word to the little girl. She vividly remembers intensely praying for Lewis to return home after hearing the sickly child's agonizing, echoing coughing fits. Frantically defending herself, Eleanor vigorously insists that she only prayed silently and never uttered a single word aloud to anyone. A sudden, terrifying epiphany violently strikes the young mage as he slowly pieces together the mysterious, unspoken magical connection. Dismissing the absurd, impossible theory that Lumina is secretly a fairy, they leave the bizarre telepathic phenomenon completely unresolved. Stepping smoothly through the darkened, quiet halls, the imposing mage calmly announces their arrival at his fragile sister's secluded bedroom door. Gently knocking on the heavy wooden frame, Lewis softly calls out to Lumina before slowly turning the cold brass handle. Taking a deep, shaky breath, the nervous, newly human-sized fairy politely excuses herself as she steps cautiously into the dimly lit room. Ignoring Eleanor's frantic, whispered pleas for more time to mentally prepare, Lewis boldly introduces his magical guest to the quiet space. A weak, incredibly gentle voice softly beckons them forward, instantly melting away the lingering, heavy tension in the still air. Sitting quietly in her massive, shadowed bed, the fragile little girl gazes up at the unexpected visitors with wide, entirely innocent eyes. Stuttering nervously under the child's pure, unwavering gaze, the towering fairy awkwardly introduces her true identity as Eleanor. Lumina softly marvels at meeting a real fairy for the very first time, leaving Eleanor blushing and awkwardly confirming her magical nature. Tilting her head in innocent, adorable confusion, the polite girl questions if this tall, human-looking woman is truly a magical fairy. Eleanor is instantly overwhelmed by Lumina's incredibly sweet nature, finding the sick girl as warmly comforting as a gentle, blooming spring breeze. Smiling brightly despite her obvious, lingering illness, the adorable child politely introduces herself to the completely captivated and enchanted fairy. A massive wave of existential confusion crashes into Eleanor's mind as she fails to recall the final boss ever having a sister in the original game. Swiftly adapting to her new, completely unexpected reality, the former tiny fairy happily embraces the comforting, practical convenience of her human-sized form. Throwing herself eagerly into her new daily role, Eleanor happily tackles the housework while constantly keeping the sickly Lumina warm company. Relying on Louis's potent blood to maintain her towering size, she joyfully discovers her new dress perfectly conceals her delicate, glittering fairy wings. Suddenly pausing her mundane chores, the sharp-eared fairy detects unfamiliar, muffled voices echoing ominously from the first floor of the house. Peeking curiously around the dark, silent corner, Eleanor silently investigates the highly unusual disturbance disrupting their normally peaceful home. An unknown woman's voice sharply cuts through the quiet house, condescendingly suggesting that children absolutely cannot properly care for the sickly Lumina. A heavy, deeply unsettling dread instantly grips Eleanor's chest as she cautiously eavesdrops on the incredibly tense, brewing conversation below. Quickly connecting the ominous dots, she remembers that the young mage specifically took the entire day off from his demanding, high-level court duties. Standing his ground fiercely, Louis coldly rejects Fenaria's intrusive offer, swearing to balance his heavy work and his sister's care entirely alone. Fanaria strictly warns the young court mage that far more complicated jobs will surely come his way soon. A heavy, suffocating silence descends upon the room as the weight of the oppressive conversation completely settles. Seething with quiet fury, Louis glares at the arrogant adults who carelessly treat his beloved sister like a disposable extra. He fiercely declares his absolute hatred for the manipulative adults attempting to control their fragile lives. Rejecting Fenaria's unwanted compromise, the young mage stubbornly refuses to ever place his sickly sister in a government facility. With absolute, chilling finality, Louis coldly orders the intrusive woman to leave his home immediately. He firmly insists his fragile sister could never survive in such a harsh environment without his constant protection. Eavesdropping from above, Eleanor realizes the greedy adults solely want to adopt the highly talented boy for their own selfish benefits. The hidden fairy quickly pieces together that this entire hostile dispute is merely a predatory adoption negotiation. Fanaria sharply dismisses Louis's desperate efforts as mere children playing house, insisting he cannot properly raise a sibling alone. Eleanor angrily concludes that these textbook trash adults see absolutely no value in raising a supposedly talentless, sickly girl. The relentless woman cruelly reminds him that a helpless child without a guardian won't be trusted during a real emergency. Stuttering in furious defiance, Louis desperately insists he is not a child despite her harsh, looming warnings. The oppressive weight of grim reality bears down entirely as the adults completely dismiss his desperate, youthful protests. Clenching his trembling fists in powerless frustration, the young boy lets out a quiet, agonizing groan. Refusing to surrender gracefully, Louis fiercely challenges the arrogant adults to beat him in a magical duel first. He stubbornly repeats his absolute demand for them to leave, entirely ignoring Fenaria's condescending lectures. A dangerous, crackling magical aura violently erupts around the young mage as his thin patience finally snaps. He coldly declares his absolute refusal to be supported by any pathetic human weaker than himself. Suddenly, the rhythmic clicking of confident footsteps echoing gracefully down the stairs abruptly shatters the heavy tension. Startled by the entirely unexpected arrival, Fanaria stammers in sheer confusion as a tall figure confidently descends the staircase. Stepping gracefully into the light, the disguised Eleanor politely apologizes for abruptly interrupting their heated argument. The towering fairy smoothly delivers a flawless, formal apology for deliberately eavesdropping on their deeply private dispute. Swiftly taking control of the turbulent narrative, she directly addresses Fenaria's core argument regarding the children's desperate need for an adult guardian. Bowing with elegant respect, Eleanor humbly requests Master Louis's formal permission to speak freely on his behalf. Utterly bewildered but playing along smoothly, the young mage hesitantly grants the mysterious woman permission to proceed. With absolute, commanding confidence, she boldly volunteers to permanently handle all the housework and the delicate care of Lady Lumina. She flawlessly corners the intrusive guest by proposing a perfect solution that allows Louis to work while erasing all of Fenaria's supposed concerns. Smoothing her elegant dress gently, the radiant fairy gracefully prepares to formally introduce herself to the stunned room. Completely flabbergasted by the sudden turn, the aggressive woman frantically demands to know the true identity of this beautiful intruder. Standing tall with unwavering, fierce resolve, Eleanor fully embraces her fabricated, commanding role as the ultimate household guardian. Later that evening, a gentle knock on the bedroom door is immediately met with a quiet, sorrowful plea from Louis to stay away. Flashing back to her grand entrance, she proudly and firmly declares her brand new identity as the official Styla's family housekeeper. Staring intently at the closed door, Eleanor internally admits that her bold, dramatic intervention was largely driven by her own selfish desires. Through the heavy wooden door, the young boy guiltily apologizes for carelessly dragging her into his miserable family drama. Utterly defeated by his circumstances, Louis tearfully confesses that no matter how hard he tries, he is merely a helpless child pretending to be an adult. Ignoring his weak, tearful protests, she gently reminds him that she isn't bound by any official housekeeper orders to stay away. With a soft, decisive click, Eleanor slowly and deliberately opens the dark bedroom door to comfort the crying boy. Gazing warmly at the highly vulnerable child, she steps carefully into the dimly lit room to offer her unwavering emotional support. Drowning in absolute despair, Louis heartbreakingly whispers that his sister might truly be better off in a crowded government facility. Tearfully recounting his childhood trauma, the young boy reveals how a greedy noble attacked him for awakening massive mana at merely 3 years old. Overwhelmed by the crushing weight of his agonizing past, his pent-up anxiety finally detonates into uncontrollable sobs. The fairy gently envelopes the weeping child in her arms, offering a silent sanctuary from his lingering terrors. Observing the quiet siblings, she deduces that Lumina vastly prefers the safety and tranquility of their familiar home. Frankly admitting her clumsiness with emotional comfort, the fairy gently commands the crying boy to listen to her proposal. She fiercely promises to shield them both from danger and watch over Lumina with unwavering dedication. Flashing a reassuring smile, she proposes that the three of them permanently claim this house as their shared sanctuary. Leaning in close, she gently seeks his eager consent to forge this new life together. The tear-streaked boy gazes up at her, his wide eyes swimming with a fragile, desperate hope. Reflecting on the past, the fairy laments her grave mistake of forgetting his fragile personality still remained in its formative stages. Clinging desperately to her tiny frame, the boy draws immense comfort from her unexpected, radiant warmth. She chillingly confesses her second critical error of completely overlooking the dark, obsessive light that permanently settled within his youthful eyes. Fast-forwarding 10 years, a sprawling, majestic human metropolis thrives under the brilliant daylight. The fairy darts gracefully through the bustling cityscape, effortlessly navigating the labyrinth of towering spires. Spotting her designated target from the expansive sky, she plummets swiftly toward the Grand Academy grounds. She smoothly infiltrates the prestigious magical facility by slipping quietly through an open upper-story window. Hovering silently through the sterile corridors, she actively hunts for the specific laboratory assigned to her now-grown charge. She boldly drifts into a sunlit, chaotic research room overflowing with advanced magical apparatus. Standing amidst towering stacks of research, 18-year-old Louis Stylas bluntly reprimands her for arriving late. The fairy dryly criticizes his careless security habits, warning that casually allowing outsiders into a government laboratory invites disaster. Now serving as the formidable chief court magician, Louis casually brushes off her warnings with absolute, unwavering confidence. When Louis justifies her access through her research contributions, she playfully mocks his blatant abuse of bureaucratic authority. Smiling warmly, she teases him about making his surrogate mother proud, instantly triggering a sharp, defensive retort from the young mage. Surveying the impressive workspace, she internally marvels at how the once powerless boy ruthlessly climbed to such a prestigious rank. Louis abruptly shoves a lunchbox into her hands, commanding her to eat quickly before he reclaims the container. Expressing her gratitude for the meal, she curiously inquires if his beloved sister Lumina also received fried chicken today. Seamlessly pivoting to business, Louis requests more strands of her hair to secure desperately needed Rank A fairy materials. She teasingly threatens to charge him money for the rare harvest, warning that taking more borders on a strict breach of contract. Louis flashes a knowing smirk, smoothly asserting that a master magician never commits a foolish contract violation. The fairy mentally verifies that high-ranking female fairy hair functions as an incredibly potent, versatile catalyst for crafting staffs and potions. Louis leans in aggressively close, his piercing gaze locking onto her small form with intense, calculating focus. Holding her ground, she silently matches his stare while acknowledging the heavy, unspoken tension thick in the air. Flashing a provocative smirk, she boldly dares him to abandon restraint and just take everything he desires. Lewis gravely reports a sudden surge in violent monster activity, urgently requesting tactical hints to amplify his offensive light magic. Instructing him to utilize more of her hair as a magical amplifier, she humbly accepts his sincere gratitude. She callously dismisses the escalating monster crisis as a trivial human problem, a detachment Lewis finds endlessly fascinating. He chuckles darkly, pointing out her stubborn habit of pretending human affairs have absolutely zero impact on her existence. Struck unexpectedly by his sharp perceptiveness, a strange, uncontrollable flutter abruptly ignites deep within her chest. She desperately questions why her heart races so erratically whenever he weaponizes that gentle, disarming smile against her defenses. Flushing a deep crimson, the thoroughly flustered fairy struggles to mask her rising embarrassment under the young magician's affectionate, piercing gaze. Radiating an undeniable presence, Eleanor perfectly fits the mold of a stunningly beautiful girl. Finishing her afternoon shopping, Eleanor hums a soft tune and resolves to head home quickly. Spotting some familiar faces, she mentally notes that the laboratory's lunch break ended a while ago. A menacing thug blocks her path, mockingly sneering at the Styles family's little servant. Standing her ground, she sharply reminds the bullies that Lord Lewis is already lamenting their poor behavior. Eleanor quickly deduces that these bitter men hate Lewis because the Great Lord probably doesn't even know they exist. Attempting to invoke authority, the servant girl firmly reminds the aggressors that they are Lord Lewis's direct subordinates. She realizes this specific man harbors deep resentment because Lewis ruthlessly took the chief court magician position that was supposed to be his. Grabbing her arm forcefully, the thug sinisterly promises they won't take much of her time as she demands to be released. Looming closer with dark intent, the men chillingly declare they aren't here to talk about official business. Panic sets in as Eleanor struggles violently against the thug's tightening grip. The leader falsely claims he has had his eye on her because she is cute, but Eleanor knows he just wants to rough her up to hurt Lewis. A sudden, sharp crack shatters the tension as a flying rock violently strikes the aggressor's head. Confused and infuriated, the thug snaps his head back to locate the source of the unexpected attack. Clutching his stinging forehead, he angrily demands to know what just hit him. Stepping fearlessly into the alley, Lumina is instantly recognized by the terrified thugs as Lord Lewis's little sister. Glaring daggers at the towering men, Lumina politely but dangerously requests they let go of their Eleanor immediately. A tense, suffocating silence stretches as the fierce young girl stands her ground against the bullies. The intimidated thugs finally break, hastily releasing their tight grip on the battered servant. Rushing to Eleanor's side, a worried Lumina embraces her as the servant gratefully thanks her young savior. Lumina furiously declares that this blatant harassment is definitely something they need to report to her brother. Back at their estate, a fiercely protective Lewis confronts Eleanor, bluntly asking if his treacherous subordinates actually harassed her. Eleanor complains about their relentless persistence, prompting Lewis to promise them a severe scolding. Lewis silently stews in his rising fury, contemplating the absolute audacity of the bitter magicians. Acknowledging her innocence, Lewis frustratedly admits he knows she never wanted to be targeted in the first place. A heavy, calculating silence falls as the young mage determines the most effective way to eliminate this lingering vulnerability. Stepping closer, Lewis firmly dictates that if enemies are going to pick fights, she desperately needs to learn how to protect herself. With absolute authority, Lewis decisively announces that they are going to practice combat magic. Eleanor inwardly panics, recognizing this treacherous location from The Demon King and the Hourglass game as a classic beginner trap area. Screaming at her demon instructor, she protests the absolute madness of choosing a high-level danger zone for her very first combat training. Ignoring her frantic complaints, Lewis coldly commands her to start by defeating the nearby monsters entirely by herself. He confidently points out that her mana is entirely sufficient and she handles it much better than her first attempt. Trembling with rising terror, Eleanor desperately begs Lewis to intervene if the situation gets genuinely dangerous. Bracing herself for the impending onslaught, she reluctantly promises to do her absolute best. Unleashing a devastating barrage of magic, Eleanor viciously curses humans while Lewis casually tells her to stop taking it out on the corpses. Lewis praises her excellent work as the exhausted girl triumphantly cheers her hard-fought victory. Her brief celebration shatters when she suddenly notices the terrifying absence of the second monster's corpse. Shrinking back down to her tiny fairy size, Eleanor realizes she completely depleted her mana just as Lewis casually calls it a day. Absolute panic violently strikes as Eleanor realizes two monsters are actually still alive and launching a sudden ambush. The towering beasts cast a lethal, terrifying shadow over the completely defenseless, exhausted fairy. Eleanor gasps in absolute shock as a blinding flash of magical energy abruptly erupts before her widened eyes. A catastrophic surge of raw magical power completely obliterates the towering monsters in a devastating, blinding explosion. The massive beast instantly disintegrates into falling ash, entirely eradicated by the overwhelming magical assault. Lewis stands calmly amidst the smoky destruction, his outstretched hands still crackling from unleashing the devastating attack. Trembling with sheer disbelief, Eleanor marvels at Lewis effortlessly casting such a powerful advanced spell without uttering a single chant. Completely drained of her vital mana, the exhausted fairy violently collapses toward the cold stone floor. Moving with blinding speed, Lewis gently catches her tiny, fragile body before she can dangerously strike the ground. He gently offers her his own blood to restore her depleted energy, playfully teasing that her shrunken size will ruin tomorrow's breakfast. Blushing furiously, Eleanor nervously accepts his intimate offer as Lewis willingly exposes his bare neck for her to feed. She gingerly leans in and gently sinks her tiny teeth into his skin to siphon the desperately needed magical energy. A fierce, possessive gaze darkens Lewis's eyes as he sharply warns her never to make such an intoxicating expression around other men. Overwhelmed by the remarkably potent influx of his rich mana, Eleanor completely zones out into a deeply blissful daze. Realizing her consciousness has temporarily faded away, Lewis quietly notes to himself that his serious warning entirely fell on deaf ears. A soft, highly contented murmur escapes her parted lips as she rests peacefully against his warm, protective embrace. Snapping violently out of her hazy stupor, a deeply flustered Eleanor frantically demands that he let her go immediately. She internally questions if her human sense of shame carried over with her reincarnated soul, marveling at how unrecognizable the former Japanese boy has truly become. Reflecting on their precarious situation at home, she decisively realizes she urgently needs to inform Lewis that the suspicious townsfolk suspect her non-human nature. She cautiously warns the young mage that the local villagers have recently begun acting incredibly strange around her. Lewis merely flashes a knowing smirk, casually admitting he fully anticipated this exact social complication would eventually arise. Radiating absolute confidence, he fiercely vows to protect her from any impending threat even if her true fairy identity is completely exposed. His gentle, highly reassuring smile instantly melts away her lingering anxieties regarding their highly precarious living situation. He solemnly confesses that his rapid ascension to the prestigious rank of chief court magician was never simply about accumulating wealth. Eleanor gazes up at him in profound awe, deeply moved by his incredibly unwavering dedication to her absolute safety. The peaceful dawn breaks as Eleanor vigorously shakes the deeply slumbering Lewis to frantically rouse him from his warm bed. She heavily sighs in fond exasperation at the incredibly powerful mage's surprisingly stubborn refusal to simply wake up. Just as she loudly announces breakfast, Lewis suddenly reaches out and swiftly grabs her tiny, unsuspecting form. Eleanor erupts in absolute terror, frantically screaming at him for carelessly grabbing her highly sensitive fairy wings. His strong fingers lightly pinch the translucent appendages, completely paralyzing the frantic fairy in his utterly inescapable grasp. She furiously reminds him that a fairy's wings are literal magical pathways that strictly define the absolute quality of their elemental power. She dramatically shrieks that tearing a single wing would instantly kill her, a lethal threat Lewis casually dismisses as merely inconvenient. Emphasizing their extreme lethal fragility, she frantically explains that every single vital life channel flows directly through those highly delicate structures. Lewis finally releases his terrifying grip, easily allowing the severely panicked fairy to frantically dart away from his dangerous hands. Trembling with lingering fear, Eleanor desperately hides behind a nearby object to frantically protect her highly precious wings. Lewis completely fails to hide his highly amused smirk, thoroughly enjoying her wildly entertaining, completely terrified reactions. Transitioning abruptly to a highly formal military briefing, an official officially requests the chief court magician's highly critical progress report. Standing tall before the commanding officers, Lewis expertly assumes his highly authoritative role within the bustling Magic Research Institute. Lewis grimly reveals highly classified reports suggesting the foundational academic theory of monsters being universally weak to light magic might be completely false. He passionately details the Institute's desperate, ongoing efforts to rapidly strengthen the elite mage corps against the rapidly escalating monster threat. A heavy, suffocating dread fills the Grand Hall as he proposes the terrifying existence of absolute monsters completely immune to all light magic. He coldly concludes his stark presentation by bluntly admitting their agonizingly slow research progress heavily remains a tremendous source of deep professional embarrassment. A formal royal meeting is actively underway to rigorously verify the ultimate effectiveness of light magic against the escalating monstrous threat. The seated king warmly praises the young mage, declaring his highly proactive attitude toward aggressively confronting monsters to be deeply admirable. Observing the weary monarch closely, Louis sharply notes the highly visible fatigue lingering heavily around His Majesty's drooping eyes. He silently deduces that this severe exhaustion must stem directly from the overwhelming, endless burden of managing complex state affairs. Expressing his deepest gratitude, the king firmly states he will absolutely continue placing his highest expectations upon the talented young magician. Accepting the praise with a sharp salute, the officials seamlessly transition the meeting to 2nd Division Commander Claire Weavy's detailed report. Striding confidently forward, the commanding knight's heavy metal boots echo sharply across the otherwise silent, grand royal chamber. Standing at perfect military attention, Claire loudly announces she will now formally present the critical report regarding the 2nd Knight Order. The highly decorated female knight maintains a fiercely serious expression as she expertly prepares to deliver her critical military update. Suddenly breaking royal protocol, a frantic voice completely shatters the tense silence by aggressively screaming for someone to completely halt their advance. Sprinting down the ornate corridor, a desperate Claire aggressively begs the swiftly departing Louis to simply halt his relentless pace. Ignoring her frantic pleas entirely, the stoic magician continues walking rapidly away without offering a single backward glance. Annoyed by her dramatic pursuit, Louis bluntly asks why the highly energetic commander can never manage to initiate a perfectly normal conversation. Panting heavily from the intense sprint, the utterly exhausted knight finally catches up to the highly elusive chief court magician. Turning slowly to face his relentless pursuer, Louis formally addresses the breathless Commander Claire of the 2nd Division. Fiercely defending her wounded pride, Claire loudly reminds him they are the exact same age while sharply demanding he never call her small. Staring coldly down at the fiery knight, Louis simply offers a deadpan, unimpressed acknowledgement of her highly aggressive verbal outburst. Getting straight to official business, Claire urgently requests teleportation magic passes to quickly establish a vital Western encampment for rookie training. Mentally reviewing the complex teleportation laws, Louis notes the strict conditions allowing specific individuals to quickly establish private transit magic circles. He further recalls the absolute mandatory body inspection protocols for foreign objects and the strict application process required for non-magic users. Clarifying her tactical intentions, Claire firmly promises the knights only plan to utilize the rare passes during severe injuries or critical emergencies. She gravely explains that highly dangerous spikes in violent monster activity demand the military aggressively prepare for the absolute worst-case scenario. Critiquing her training methods, Louis bluntly suggests the struggling rookies would greatly benefit from handling all physical movements entirely on their own. Dismissing himself abruptly, Louis turns to leave as the highly frustrated commander immediately yells for him to desperately wait yet again. Yielding to his demanding schedule, Claire officially promises to submit a formal requisition for approximately 50 vital magical passes later today. Shifting the tense conversation to a sudden personal note, a deeply flushed Claire hesitantly asks if the busy mage already has dinner plans tonight. Stuttering nervously under his intense gaze, the typically fierce military commander completely loses her normally unshakable, confident composure. Misunderstanding his crushing silence, a visibly disappointed Claire nervously stammers out a highly dejected, utterly defeated acceptance. Louis politely declines her awkward invitation, smoothly explaining that his highly dedicated housekeeper has likely already finalized his evening meal preparations. Waving a hasty goodbye, Claire swiftly retreats down the hallway as Louis wonders aloud what trivial, annoying matter will completely consume her attention next. Meanwhile at the Grand Estate, a thoroughly bewildered Eleanor stares at an explicit book and shockingly realizes this fantasy world also features adult-only ratings. Catching her highly inappropriate muttering, an utterly confused Lumina innocently asks Eleanor what strange, baffling topic she is actively rambling about. Eleanor internally panics over a hopeless bad ending titled, Lust of the Dark, which famously forces the female protagonist into highly explicit interactions. Misinterpreting the chaotic situation entirely, a fiercely protective Lumina sternly decides this incredibly suspicious behavior definitely needs to be reported directly to her brother. Startled by Louis's sudden arrival, a deeply flustered Eleanor frantically stammers a nervous welcome and quickly offers to brew some fresh tea. Announcing his unexpected return, Louis instantly narrows his eyes and suspiciously demands to know exactly what caused Eleanor's incredibly guilty, panicked expression. Eleanor's frantic panic abruptly fades into absolute confusion as she peers past Louis and suddenly notices unexpected, heavily armed guests standing in the doorway. Choosing to completely ignore her chaotic behavior, Louis smoothly commands the bewildered housekeeper to quickly prepare enough hot tea for 3 people. Snapping back into her professional role, Eleanor formally bows and politely introduces herself as the dedicated housekeeper of the prestigious Stylus family. Stepping fully into the warm light, Commander Claire formally introduces her imposing, totally silent companion as the formidable Vice Commander Gil. Commander Claire Weavy formally introduces herself as the head of the Second Night Order, expressing eager anticipation to work alongside them. Eleanor nervously senses a heavy, unreadable emotion lurking behind the silent Vice Commander's piercing gaze. Trembling under the immense pressure, she realizes these formidable knights are the most important guests their estate has ever received. She awkwardly stammers, desperately trying to maintain her crumbling composure in front of the highly intimidating military duo. Stepping forward to correct the tense atmosphere, the imposing man formally introduces himself as Gil Rem Fanaria, eldest son of the prestigious Fanaria family. Eleanor mentally gasps in absolute shock, instantly recognizing him as the son of the greedy noble who previously attempted to forcefully adopt young Louis. Staring at the towering knight, she furiously notes that the two men look absolutely nothing alike despite sharing the infamous family name. Louis calmly intervenes in her frantic thoughts, bluntly asking if Eleanor genuinely wished he had accepted that fateful adoption offer years ago. He gravely admits that if she had not barged into that room, he would have inevitably become Gil's unwilling stepbrother. Eleanor nervously pieces together the volatile connection between the Stylas and Fanaria families, wondering if their inherent incompatibility caused the earlier harassment. Claire quickly waves off the rising tension, brightly assuring them that Gil is naturally worried and has always possessed terribly blunt manners. Despite Claire's cheerful reassurance, Eleanor painfully suspects the towering Vice Commander actively dislikes her, though she bravely decides to quietly endure it. Breaking his heavy silence, Gil coldly orders the anxious hosts not to waste any unnecessary worry on their sudden arrival. Snapping back to her housekeeper duties, Eleanor politely directs the three into the guest room while hastily retreating to prepare fresh tea. The exact moment Eleanor leaves, Gil immediately locks eyes with Louis and demands to know the absolute truth about that suspicious woman. A heavy, suffocating tension violently clashes between the two young men as they fiercely stare each other down in the quiet hallway. Gil aggressively confronts Louis with deeply unsettling rumors, brutally suggesting the brilliant court mage is being actively deceived by a dangerous female monster. Louis maintains an absolutely flawless, icy composure in the face of the knight's deeply offensive and utterly ridiculous accusation. The suffocating standoff shatters instantly as a polite, hesitant voice suddenly interrupts their highly intense, hostile interrogation. To Gil's absolute shock, Louis abruptly breaks his icy facade and violently erupts into a fit of highly uncontrollable, echoing laughter. The young mage clutches his face, genuinely amused by the utterly absurd nature of the severe knight's solemn, misplaced accusation. Wiping away a tear of mirth, Louis darkly admits that to the ignorant public, it absolutely appears as though she is the one deceiving him. A familiar, gentle voice softly calls out Louis's name, instantly drawing his sharply focused attention back to the present reality. The scene violently shifts as an ethereal, older Eleanor softly whispers his name in a highly intimate, disorienting dreamlike haze. Blushing furiously in the shadowy vision, she gently scolds him to stop leaving highly visible, possessive marks on her pale skin. The feverish dream violently escalates, rapidly flooding his sleeping mind with deeply intoxicating, incredibly intimate and overwhelming sensations. Gasping softly in the steamy illusion, the dream Eleanor desperately begs him to halt his relentless, utterly passionate advances. Jolting with sudden realization, Louis stares in absolute shock as the undeniable identity of his beautiful dream partner violently clicks into place. The romantic illusion abruptly shatters as a deeply betrayed Eleanor coldly declares she was an absolute fool to ever trust a human boy. Glaring at him with profound disgust, she ruthlessly condemns him as just another lying, endlessly deceitful human. Delivering the ultimate crushing blow, she coldly bids him farewell and cruelly announces her absolute decision to permanently pair up with a fellow fairy. Plunged into absolute despair, Louis frantically screams for her to wait as she violently turns her back on him forever. He violently lunges forward into the suffocating darkness, desperately screaming Eleanor's name at the absolute top of his lungs. Gasping for desperate air, Louis violently snaps awake in his dark bedroom, his terrified heart hammering wildly against his ribcage. Clutching his sweating face in the silent darkness, he heavily groans upon realizing it was just another deeply tormenting, vivid nightmare. He sits completely paralyzed in the chilling shadows, utterly drained by the intense, relentless emotional whiplash of his own sleeping mind. He exhaustedly reflects on how he has relentlessly suffered through these highly polarizing dreams of intense lust and crushing despair for agonizing years. Staring blankly at his trembling hands, he miserably admits that the alternating nightmares always leave him feeling absolutely, entirely hollowed out. A tiny, sleepy Eleanor suddenly shifts beside him, softly asking if her restless movements accidentally roused him from his deep slumber. Swallowing his lingering, desperate panic, Louis gently reassures the drowsy fairy that absolutely everything is perfectly fine. Deciding she needs to fly to avoid forgetting how to perfectly move her wings, the restless fairy confidently prepares to head outside into the cool night. Catching her sudden movements, a wide-awake Louis gently asks what is wrong and if she is currently struggling to sleep. Channeling his formidable internal power, the young mage immediately begins chanting a complex wind spell deployment in the dim room. Swirling currents of immense magical energy rapidly erupt, visually manifesting his potent spell with absolute precision. Believing some fresh air will efficiently cure his insomnia, Louis asks to join her while she cautiously questions if he can endure the lack of rest. Flawlessly layering his advanced magic, Louis commands the elements to forcefully protect, sustain, and float his physical body. Eleanor marvels at his stunning ability to casually layer high-level magic, though he practically notes it absolutely prevents a disastrous crash during their midnight stroll. Reaching out with remarkably gentle hands, Louis carefully lifts the tiny, fragile fairy into his warm palms. Securing her safely within his secure grasp, he confidently asks if she is entirely ready before they launch into the sky. Drifting peacefully beneath the glowing night sky, Eleanor admiringly whispers that the brilliant moon perfectly suits the handsome young mage. She casually notes that his striking aesthetic flawlessly matches an official setting ripped straight from the game, The Demon King and the Hourglass. Louis remains absolutely silent, bathing in the ethereal, silver moonlight as he holds her securely against the rushing wind. He quietly dismisses the trivial comparison, instantly prompting her to question if he genuinely knew about that highly specific official lore. Eleanor eagerly explains that the game's designated love interests were specifically designed to aesthetically complement either glowing moonlight or clear blue skies. Staring at her with an intense, unreadable gaze, Louis cryptically points out that she has foolishly placed her absolute trust in a fellow reincarnated comrade. He ominously warns her that despite currently inhabiting the exact same world, their core psychological natures remain fundamentally, dangerously different. A sharp, echoing knock abruptly shatters the heavy, suffocating silence of the dimly lit palace hallway. Sitting entirely calm at his expansive wooden desk, Louis effortlessly invites the unseen visitor to step inside his private office. Stepping tentatively through the massive doorway, Commander Claire nervously enters his quiet, highly organized workspace. Utterly astonished by his sharp perception, the armored knight remarks that the brilliant mage instantly knew she was the one standing behind the heavy door. Louis smoothly explains he recognizes her distinct footsteps because she used to constantly, loudly call out to him from behind during their youth. Shifting seamlessly to official military business, he calmly asks if she has arrived to discuss the highly anticipated teleportation magic passes. Deeply flustered by his flawless, intimate memory, Claire loudly announces she is simply here to formally submit the required request form. Blushing furiously under his gaze, she awkwardly mutters that the esteemed mage truly did not need to remember such trivial, embarrassing childhood details. Regaining her fierce knightly composure, Claire firmly requests a closer campsite magic circle to guarantee swift troop movement during lethal emergencies. Acknowledging the absolute lack of nearby teleportation circles, Louis verifies if the proposed tactical campsite strictly borders the rushing rail river. Claire confidently assures the pragmatic mage that the wealthy knights will completely cover the heavy financial cost of dispatching his magical architects. Louis respectfully acknowledges the crucial financial support, declaring that their generous backing is an absolutely massive operational help. He decisively promises to immediately dispatch 2 highly capable individuals to physically construct the new magic circle, earning her profound gratitude. Cynically questioning if the harsh training is fundamentally a waste of time, he notes that instantly dismissing an intense effort as reckless makes one an undeniable loser. Warning the highly determined knight not to recklessly overdo the rigorous camping, he firmly states that pushing herself to the breaking point won't lead to tactical victory. Nodding silently in absolute agreement, Claire turns her armored back and marches steadily toward the heavy wooden exit. Pausing mid-step, she confidently declares that the grueling military effort will fiercely remain a profoundly valuable experience even without immediate, tangible results. Gazing softly at her unyielding, determined posture, Louis gently agrees with her surprisingly wise, highly mature tactical assessment. A brilliant crimson blush violently paints Claire's cheeks as she nervously steals one last, incredibly lingering glance at the handsome court mage. She fiercely promises to head over to the camp personally once the travel pass is completely ready, urgently asking him to wait for her inevitable arrival. Reflecting on their deeply shared past, Claire sadly recalls genuinely believing she was the absolute closest person to Louis during their isolated childhood. Staring longingly at his retreating back in her memories, a young Claire realizes how deeply and naturally she grew violently attached to the lonely boy. She painfully remembers how, surrounded by towering, manipulative adults acting like impenetrable black walls, they were the absolute only 2 children surviving the vicious court. Overflowing with pure, unadulterated childhood joy, a 12-year-old Claire blushes fiercely as she eagerly accepts his rare, highly coveted invitation to go shopping together. Breathing a heavy sigh of absolute relief, a shadowed figure gladly acknowledges that a tense, unseen situation has finally stabilized. Trembling with intense nervous energy, 12-year-old Louis desperately pleads with his companion to accompany him on a daunting shopping expedition. Piercing through the boy's lingering hesitation, his companion curiously demands to know exactly what mysterious item he urgently intends to purchase. Flustered after accidentally grabbing her hand as if she were his own sister, Louis apologizes profusely while she completely brushes off the awkward mistake. A sudden, jolting realization strikes them like lightning as the chaotic, back-and-forth conversation abruptly halts in its tracks. Steeling his frayed nerves, Louis boldly confesses his shocking, entirely unexpected intention to shop for women's clothing. He rapidly backpedals to desperately clarify that the mysterious garment is merely a simple gift rather than any formal, elaborate attire. Stunned by this massive revelation, his companion openly wonders if this highly unexpected women's clothing is meant for a very special occasion. A heavy, pregnant silence violently descends as the sheer gravity of this mysterious, unspoken errand hangs palpably in the cold air. In a crushing, overwhelming wave of dark introspection, Louis abruptly realizes his own blinding arrogance during their fleeting, intense interaction. Shifting abruptly to an intense academic debate, a scholar sharply questions whether a binding contract truly operates as ancient magic or dangerous sorcery. The Stoic instructor authoritatively confirms that the binding contract itself stands officially classified as a traditional, ancient form of raw magic. Thrilled by the sudden revelation, an explosive, joyful realization violently erupts that the mysterious, ancient force is undeniably pure magic. The teacher rigidly dictates that all mages must take absolute responsibility, never abuse their beasts, and forge every single pact strictly through mutual consent. Pressing the rigorous lesson aggressively forward, the instructor fiercely challenges the student to perfectly recite the 3 unbreakable principles of magical contracts. Wrapping up their grueling academic session, the tutor heavily praises Lumina for aggressively conquering her missed lessons with undeniable, sheer dedication. The tutor proudly reflects on meticulously filling Lumina's educational gaps through private sessions, watching her grow significantly stronger despite her lingering, chaotic instability. Hammering home a wildly vital magical law, the instructor rigidly reiterates that a complete, binding contract cannot physically exist without absolute mutual consent. With the complex foundational theories firmly established, the confident instructor smoothly accelerates into the next demanding, high-stakes phase of their magical lesson. Laughing off dark accusations of weird behavior toward Eleanor, the brother brazenly admits his past catastrophic failure of trying to force a binding ritual on a sleeping fairy. He loudly and fiercely proclaims the intense, unwavering affection that both dedicated siblings fiercely harbor for the beloved Eleanor. Acknowledging this intense, overwhelmingly possessive bond, his companion completely understands the brother's desperate desire to keep Eleanor totally isolated within the powerful stylus house. Plunging deep into terrifying mystical theories, the instructor gravely warns that neither magic nor sorcery reigns omnipotent over the sacred, untouchable domain of life. A stark, unbreakable truth violently shatters their academic illusions as the instructor definitively declares that absolutely no mage possesses the godlike power to artificially create life. Despite their complete, frustrating inability to forge new life, highly skilled mages still wield the terrifying, immense power to unnaturally accelerate biological growth. Overflowing with immense satisfaction, the tutor happily commends Lumina's razor-sharp intellect and the wildly productive nature of their intense, grueling session. Suddenly interrupting the quiet academic peace, a curious voice aggressively demands to know the exact, detailed outcome of Lumina's exhausting study session. A sly, mischievous chuckle heavily fills the quiet room as a playful, fiercely teasing question abruptly breaks the mounting academic tension. Radiating absolute, unwavering resolve, the brother fiercely rejects a dark, looming destiny by declaring he has absolutely no intention of ever ascending as the dreaded Demon King. Utterly baffled by this truth, his companion marvels aloud at how such a remarkably kind and patient older brother could ever morph into the terrifying Demon King. Igniting wild, unchecked romantic speculation, the companion cheerfully teases that the story's main protagonist might unexpectedly pursue young Louis's charming, innocent route. Louis immediately and violently obliterates the romantic rumors, coldly stating his absolute, unshakable lack of interest in ever being pursued by anyone. Highlighting a massive, glaring contradiction, his friend mockingly points out that Louis's stubborn reluctance will completely destroy his own desperate wish to eventually meet the protagonist. Shrugging off the harsh, piercing critique, Louis calmly insists he only plans to cautiously navigate the safe, heavily well-lit confines of the main streets. Marveling at the sprawling, magnificent urban magic, The companion enthusiastically notes that elite court mages meticulously manage the city's brilliant magical streetlights. Oozing with absolute, unshakable confidence, the mage rapidly assures them that his highly capable colleagues can effortlessly maintain the immense streetlight network without his direct oversight. Sensing his violently creeping exhaustion, Eleanor suddenly steps forward with deep, piercing concern violently swirling in her gentle, watchful eyes. Eleanor softly but intensely calls out Louis's name, her single, quiet word carrying a crushing, overwhelming weight of profound anxiety. A heavy, electrifying silence violently grips the tense room as a deeply intimate and wholly unspoken tension violently peaks between the two characters. Gently checking his rapidly rising temperature, Eleanor affectionately but firmly orders the highly feverish boy straight to bed. Startled by a sudden shout, Louis's name loudly shatters the heavy silence. Stumbling over his scattered words, he desperately calls out to Eleanor in the tense atmosphere. Gripped by intense emotion, the characters stare silently as the suffocating tension violently mounts. The heavy atmosphere completely consumes the silent room as unspoken emotions fiercely clash. Realizing Eleanor's sudden presence, he instantly assumes the familiar, haunting dream has aggressively begun once more. Filled with deep concern, Eleanor anxiously asks if Louis is all right while he groggily murmurs her name. Enjoying her gentle touch, he bleakly anticipates the sweet dream will inevitably morph into absolute, terrifying despair. Overwhelmed by a desperate yearning, he forcefully reaches out to physically touch her despite his underlying, crippling fears. A powerful, unspoken connection crackles fiercely between them in the profound, heavy silence. The emotional intensity violently peaks as they remain permanently locked in a heavy, wordless exchange. A sudden, sharp gasp violently cuts through the overwhelming emotional gravity of the intense moment. Softly whispering his name, the haunting voice violently pulls Louis deeper into the unsettling, dark encounter. Confronting him with chilling intensity, a dark figure fiercely demands to know if he foolishly plans to escape. Writhing in rapidly mounting agony, Louis desperately begs the tormenting force to completely and mercifully stop. A terrifying, unforgiving vow of absolute vengeance violently echoes through the crushing, endless darkness. The nightmare's heavy grip violently tightens as the sinister shadows fully consume the terrifying scene. Waking from the terrifying ordeal, Louis groggily realizes the bright morning light has finally arrived. Heavy, exhausted breaths violently escape his lungs as he desperately tries to anchor himself in safe reality. The morning light fiercely pierces the room, completely washing away the lingering, oppressive shadows of his dark nightmare. Bursting with sudden, explosive energy, Eleanor cheerfully shouts a bright good morning to the utterly startled boy. Quickly recovering his shattered composure, Louis politely returns Eleanor's bright, energetic morning greeting. A swift, sudden movement fiercely catches Louis's attention as their normal morning routine abruptly begins. The quiet domestic atmosphere violently shifts as an unspoken, heavy tension awkwardly settles directly between them. Eleanor brightly expresses her absolute relief at his health while he firmly insists he feels perfectly fine. Piercing through his obvious evasion, Eleanor fiercely questions if he is intentionally avoiding her intense, watchful gaze. Playfully mocking his highly flustered reaction, she instantly points out his blatant, awkward attempt to quickly look away. A sharp, sudden blush violently creeps across Louis's face as he desperately struggles to hide his totally flustered state. The intense, awkward tension fiercely amplifies as they share a highly charged, completely silent moment together. Gently but firmly demanding his full, undivided attention, Eleanor softly urges him to completely look at her. Uttering her name with heavy, undeniable emotion, Louis completely surrenders to her intense, unwavering gaze. A deeply intimate connection violently sparks between them as their focused eyes finally lock together. The overwhelming emotional weight of the intense moment completely renders them utterly and entirely speechless. A sudden, shocking realization fiercely hits Louis's mind like a massive, devastating physical blow. Confronted by undeniable reality, he shockingly realizes the intense nocturnal encounter was definitely not a mere, fleeting dream. Desperately trying to halt his rapid retreat, Eleanor fiercely reaches out while mistakenly calling him a little boy. With intense, undeniable conviction, Louis firmly declares that she must completely and utterly understand his true feelings. Asserting his sudden, forceful maturity, Louis aggressively demands that she permanently stop calling him a little boy. Returning with a powerful, dominating new aura, an older-looking Louis confidently announces his confident arrival home to Eleanor. Eleanor smoothly offers him the classic choice between dinner or a shower, and he calmly but firmly requests the shower. The narrator boldly declares that young Louis's entire vibe has completely and dramatically transformed ever since that fateful, defining day. Returning home with a warm greeting, Louis presents a special souvenir to a stunned Eleanor. Completely taken aback by the sudden gesture, Eleanor stares silently at the unexpected gift. Flashing a confident smirk, Lewis smoothly invites her to join him inside together. Eleanor silently realizes that he has completely stopped trying to hide his true romantic feelings for her. Flustered by his bold advance, she nervously yells at him to stop saying such weird things while he merely chuckles. Panicking over the chaotic breakfast, someone aggressively shouts that they are absolutely not going to eat it. Fiercely protective, a frantic voice violently warns the other to stay far away from the dangerous fire. Munching on his breakfast, Lewis casually greets Eleanor as chores like hanging out the laundry aggressively demand attention. A sudden, heavy silence descends as the chaotic morning routine abruptly shifts. Breaking the quiet tension, a cheerful voice suddenly suggests they all go out and have a fun picnic. Caught completely off guard by the unexpected proposal, Eleanor utters a soft sound of utter confusion. Doubling down on the cheerful idea, the request to have a lovely picnic is firmly and enthusiastically repeated. The characters exchange silent, surprised glances as the spontaneous outdoor plan rapidly takes shape. Anticipation violently builds as the group gears up for their unexpected, refreshing outdoor excursion. Splashing cheerfully in the cool water, the peaceful outdoor setting springs vividly to life. Noting that Lumina tires out easily, they carefully decide to let her rest at a good spot to conserve her energy for the trip back. Fiercely protective, someone aggressively warns Lumina not to wander too deeply into the perilous surroundings. Eleanor silently deduces that Lumina suggested the picnic to cleverly break the lingering awkwardness between the two of them. Still slightly puzzled, Eleanor internally wonders what truly sparked this sudden, cheerful outing. Blushing with sudden realization, she stammers out that the recent tension was entirely because of Lewis's bold actions. An overwhelming wave of pure embarrassment furiously paints her cheeks a bright, glowing red. Shaking off her flustered thoughts, Eleanor cheerfully offers to pour the warm tea while quickly running off to call Lumina. Glowing with absolute joy, Lumina gleefully expresses how much fun she is having back at the beautiful Lake Nascent. Letting out a soft, exhausted sigh, Lumina finally takes a much-needed break from her wildly energetic playing. Catching her breath, Lumina softly calls out to Eleanor with a sudden, deeply serious tone. Lumina nostalgically points out that they haven't visited this beautiful lake since Lewis became overwhelmingly busy. Overflowing with deep gratitude, Lumina admits that Eleanor is the very first person to ever kindly take her outside like this. Filled with unwavering affection, Lumina fiercely declares that she absolutely refuses to call anyone else her sister but Eleanor. Chuckling warmly, Eleanor gently suggests that Lumina's brother is merely acting a little too aggressively overprotective. Dropping a heavy emotional bomb, Lumina nervously confesses her deep fear that differing lifespans might completely ruin any chances of romance. Utterly shocked by the heavy topic, Eleanor bluntly asks if fairies and humans are even physically allowed to get married. A stunned, heavily weighted silence crashes down as the intense romantic implications fully sink into their minds. The world's intricate lore reveals that lovers fiercely exchange specific timepieces instead of traditional wedding rings. In this romantic tradition, the ultimate symbol of eternal devotion is receiving a beautifully crafted hourglass. Drifting into peaceful unconsciousness, the deeply exhausted fairy falls softly asleep on the grass. Resting deeply and quietly, Lumina's gentle breathing totally fills the serene, beautifully quiet space. Frantically denying the terrifying possibility, Eleanor fiercely convinces herself that Lewis absolutely could never possess such a meaningful hourglass. A sudden, heart-stopping visual wildly confirms the hidden existence of the dreaded, romantic hourglass. Glancing softly downward, Eleanor affectionately confirms that the exhausted Lumina has completely fallen fast asleep. The quiet, serene moment beautifully concludes the peaceful but emotionally loaded lakeside picnic. Staring silently into the void, a deeply flustered character struggles to find the right words to say. Frantically waving her hands, she nervously blurts out that the unexpected situation simply didn't suit him. Furrowing her brow in deep concentration, she desperately tries to recall the exact name of the kingdom's first prince. Brushing off the mental block, she bluntly declares her absolute lack of interest in any royal affairs. Despite his elegant posture on the ground, the young man fiercely insists that he is merely a humble commoner. Gazing at him intently, Eleanor silently reflects on how long she has supposedly known him since childhood. Acknowledging Lumina's growth, Eleanor shockingly realizes just how drastically Lewis has transformed over the years. Overwhelmed by a crushing fear of abandonment, she tearfully confesses her dread of being left behind while everyone else evolves. Shattering the heavy tension, Lewis playfully grabs her hand and firmly insists that such a simple gesture is perfectly fine. Gripping her hand tightly, a quiet, tender moment beautifully blossoms between the two childhood companions. Flushing deeply, Eleanor stammers that despite holding hands all the time in the past, something feels dangerously different now. A profound, electrifying silence violently grips the scene as their unspoken emotions fiercely clash in the quiet space. Standing incredibly close, the overwhelming romantic tension completely captivates both characters in a breathless stalemate. The heavy, emotionally charged atmosphere heavily lingers as the profound moment slowly settles around them. Glancing toward the bustling palace, a character abruptly notices a rowdy, chaotic commotion suddenly breaking out. Shifting the narrative a few days later, a grand, highly anticipated event rapidly begins to unfold. An impressive, heavily armed contingent of elite knights stands at absolute, unwavering attention in the courtyard. Marveling at the massive royal procession, awestruck onlookers gasp wildly at the breathtaking, magnificent sight. Barking ferocious orders, the intense commanding officer aggressively warns the troops that no sickness will halt their march. Intimidated by her fierce aura, observers finally recognize the undeniable, terrifying authority of the high-ranking knight. Demanding absolute silence, the fierce commander violently orders her elite troops to listen up immediately. Raising her booming voice over the chaotic clamor, she aggressively announces their imminent, high-stakes departure. Whispering maliciously, the gathered crowd gossips that the cute commander is actually a terrifying monster who maliciously bewitches men. Expressing absolute disbelief, bystanders openly marvel at how easily the brilliant Louis was supposedly fooled by her wicked charm. Pointing excitedly toward the grand procession, onlookers eagerly wonder if the squad is heading straight to a grueling training camp. Spotting the famous duo, an excited spectator loudly cheers at finally witnessing the remarkably close pair together. Realizing her exposed position, Eleanor quickly decides she will urgently need Louis to buy her a hat to hide her face. Stunned by the unexpected honor, the awestruck knights marvel that Master Louis personally arrived to see them off. Louis stands solemnly before the troops, effortlessly projecting an aura of undeniable authority and quiet grace. Stepping intimately closer, the commander softly calls out to him with a lingering, deeply affectionate concern. Exasperated yet gentle, Louis repeatedly urges the worried commander to stop fretting and remain extremely careful on her mission. Sympathizing with the young mage's mild cold, the crowd murmurs about the incredibly tough burden placed on someone so remarkably young. Despite the presence of highly capable knights, the commander fiercely admits her absolute reluctance to ever leave His Highness's side. Fueling the rampant public rumors, the crowd fiercely whispers that the knight commander is hopelessly head over heels for Master Louis. A beautiful, deeply lingering glance solidifies their profound romantic bond right in front of the highly watchful crowd. The narrator boldly highlights how everyone deeply admires the dazzling, unbeatable combination of the chief mage and the knight commander. Bitterly contrasting herself with the admired duo, Eleanor internalizes the harsh insults labeling her as a monstrous little servant. Completely overwhelmed by her crushing, dark insecurities, a heartbroken Eleanor sadly decides to silently head back home. Watching the majestic couple completely steal the spotlight, the narrator solemnly concludes that everyone believes they are a perfectly matched pair. The scene fades into a heavy, suffocating silence as Eleanor's deep emotional isolation fiercely widens in the quiet shadows. Softly breaking the heavy silence, a shadowed character gently calls out Eleanor's name in the quiet room. Suddenly recalling his exact identity, Eleanor loudly blurts out that his name is undeniably Gilrem Fanaria. Connecting the surprising dots, Eleanor murmurs in absolute shock upon realizing his direct tie to the fierce commander. Apologizing for his previous lack of hospitality, Gilrem smoothly jokes that his tea was miraculously more drinkable than the commander's bitter brew. A sudden, sharp breath violently escapes someone's lips as the casual conversation takes an unexpectedly tense turn. Catching her painfully obvious reaction, Gilrem smugly points out that the awkward situation clearly bothers her after all. A heavy, suffocating silence violently descends as the undeniable weight of his sharp observation hangs in the air. Fiercely denying the sudden accusation, Eleanor violently shouts that she and Louis are absolutely not in a romantic relationship. Chuckling at her frantic defense, Gilrem mockingly notes how incredibly easy she is to read after catching on to his teasing so fast. Flustered by his relentless probing, she desperately stammers that she is technically just a guardian living completely off Louis's massive salary. Offering a surprisingly gentle out, Gilrem kindly tells her there is absolutely no need to force such a highly complicated explanation. Smirking with dark amusement, he cryptically declares that the sheer unpredictability of failing plans is exactly what makes life so thrilling. Acknowledging his bizarre, twisted philosophy, Eleanor simply stares back in a profound, deeply unsettled silence. Desperately trying to crush the spreading rumor, she firmly reiterates that they are not dating because Louis is far too incredible for her. Dropping all pretenses, Gilrem bluntly urges her to reject Louis quickly because it would massively benefit his own hidden agenda. Backpedaling with blinding speed, Gilrem casually brushes off his intense, demanding request with a highly suspicious and sudden apology. Highly suspicious of his bizarre motives, Eleanor fiercely demands to know exactly what he means by proudly invoking his Fanaria bloodline. Bitterly exposing his dark reality, Gilrem reveals that his family's generations of loyalty make him nothing but a tail-wagging servant for Claire Weavy. The crushing, suffocating weight of his forced servitude violently silences the tense, highly uncomfortable room. Shattering the heavy quiet, Gilrem suddenly steps aggressively closer and ominously asks if he can try one little thing. Moving with terrifying, blinding speed, a sudden physical action aggressively startles Eleanor out of her wits. Trembling from the abrupt, terrifying movement, she breathlessly scolds him for pulling such a recklessly dangerous stunt. Erupting in sheer panic, a chaotic voice violently demands to know exactly what Gilrem thinks he is doing. Crippled by pure instinctual terror, the fairy realizes Gilrem's deadly silver sword rests lethally within mere touching distance. The intense, life-or-death standoff violently peaks as the gleaming silver blade heavily dominates the cramped, terrifying space. Laughing off the horrifying near-miss, Gilrem casually apologizes for unintentionally sparking such massive, sheer panic. A completely stunned, breathless pause forcefully halts the chaotic, near-fatal interaction dead in its tracks. Slowly relaxing his hyper-aggressive posture, Gilrem calmly steps back from the completely rattled and terrified fairy. Feigning absolute, pristine innocence, Gilrem tilts his head and casually asks what could possibly be wrong now. Glancing nervously around the tense area, the deeply shaken characters desperately struggle to recover their completely shattered composure. Spotting a highly familiar face, Eleanor instantly drops her heavy guard and softly breathes Lewis's name in pure relief. Watching the screaming fangirls from afar, Gilrem darkly wonders just how long Lewis has been acutely aware of his hidden presence. Chilled by the young mage's unfathomable depths, Gilrem firmly concludes that Lewis is an incredibly terrifying and dangerous man. Slumping forward with impossibly heavy shoulders, Eleanor weakly confesses that the entire chaotic ordeal has completely drained her. Seeking desperate, immediate comfort, Eleanor silently leans heavily into Lewis's incredibly safe and welcoming presence. A deeply tender, highly unspoken moment of profound relief beautifully washes over the thoroughly exhausted pair. Watching them closely, Eleanor painfully convinces herself that the brilliant smile Lewis exclusively gives Claire is undeniably special. Heartbroken by her own crushing insecurities, she tragically concludes that Lewis and Claire are a universally blessed, absolutely perfect match. Plunging deeper into dark despair, Eleanor silently acknowledges the glaring, undeniable truth that Claire is fiercely in love with Lewis. Racked with immense, suffocating guilt, Eleanor viciously hates herself for selfishly clinging to the beautiful fact that Lewis deliberately chose her. A chaotic swirl of confusion clouds her mind as an overwhelming mess takes hold. A breathless gasp escapes her lips as exhaustion suddenly sets in. The surrounding atmosphere grows inexplicably heavy with a lingering, unspoken tension. Lumina dashes frantically into her brother's arms despite his gentle scolding. Furious and flailing, Lumina angrily accuses her brother of doing something terrible to Eleanor. To his absolute shock, Lumina reveals the grim truth that Eleanor has run away from home. A sudden, crushing silence falls over them as the gravity of the runaway revelation sinks in. Clutching a reassuring note left behind about dinner, the undeniable reality of Eleanor's escape shatters their peace. Gloomy rain begins to pour outside, matching the sudden dread pooling in their chests. Refusing to wait, the brother immediately declares his mission to brave the storm and find the missing girl. Lumina calls out to him with palpable concern etched deeply across her face. She warns him ominously that Eleanor might be trapped and unable to return even if she desperately wants to. Resolving his inner turmoil, he firmly decides that it is not too late to save her. He charges headlong into the unforgiving downpour, driven entirely by sheer determination. Pleading with tearful urgency, Lumina begs him to quickly rescue the starving Eleanor. A rapid sequence of methodical thoughts races through his mind as he formulates a frantic search plan. Deep within the rain-slicked woods, a desolate figure cowers alone against the harsh elements. Shivering in the bitter cold, Eleanor realizes to her dismay that her body has reverted to its vulnerable original size. The biting chill of the raging storm relentlessly batters her weakened, solitary frame. Exhaustion dragging her down, she heavily contemplates surrendering to the dark embrace of sleep. Bitterly rejecting the surrounding flora, she realizes that tasting Lewis's high-quality mana has completely ruined her appetite for anything else. Piercing the stormy darkness, a familiar voice sternly demands she reveal herself from her desperate hiding spot. Stunned by the sudden arrival, she breathes Lewis's name in sheer, overwhelming disbelief. Lewis stands tall amidst the raging tempest, his piercing gaze locking securely onto her trembling form. Commanding her to drop into his waiting arms, he promises to safely catch her since she can no longer fly. Catching her securely, he softly scolds her for recklessly braving the dangerous outside world alone. A breathless moment of absolute stillness envelopes them as the frantic search finally comes to a peaceful end. Understanding her terrible plight, he gently acknowledges the foul taste of the mundane plants she tried to eat. He directly questions her desperate attempt to consume anything other than his life-giving blood. Shielding her from the relentless rain, he swiftly guides them toward a nearby abandoned hut for immediate shelter. The dilapidated hut provides a temporary, desperate sanctuary from the howling tempest outside. Offering his own flesh without hesitation, he commands her to feed and quickly restore her lost strength. Greedily latching on, she desperately drinks in his rich essence while fervently craving even more. Completely intoxicated by the exquisite flavor, she feverishly devours the sweet mana flowing rapidly from him. The intoxicating rush of high-quality mana wildly revitalizes her drained, desperate body. Suddenly snapping back to reality, she calls out to Lewis in a haze of sheer confusion. A heavy, breathless tension instantly fills the small hut as an unexpected shift occurs between them. Blushing fiercely, she stammers uncontrollably as she notices the sudden, compromising state of his ruined clothes. An overwhelming rush of acute embarrassment completely paralyzes her once feral, starving instincts. Gasping in sudden shock, a flustered sound escapes her lips as the intensely intimate encounter reaches a boiling point. A heavy, breathless silence dominates the scene as unspoken tension thickens the air. Deep shadows completely conceal the shifting, intimate movements of the intertwined figures. An intense, magnetic closeness bridges the gap between them as all physical boundaries dissolve. Trembling with vulnerability, she desperately pleads for him not to look at her in such a compromising state. A silent, gravitational pull draws them even closer as words utterly fail to capture the raw emotion. Breaking the silence, Eleanor confesses that wandering through the forest made her seriously contemplate dating Lewis. Blushing softly, she openly admits that being deeply involved with him is something she genuinely wouldn't mind. A wave of melancholy washes over her as she firmly rejects the tragic idea of choosing the protagonist to follow the system. Explaining her startling realization, she reveals that this world simultaneously operates as both an RPG and a heavily scripted romance game. Staring directly into his eyes, Eleanor asserts that Lewis is fundamentally different because he is a reincarnated person exactly like her. Acknowledging her sharp intuition without hesitation, Lewis quietly confirms that she has finally noticed his true nature. Revealing his own hidden origins, he shockingly explains that he was originally a pure Japanese person before entering this chaotic life. Unveiling a massive twist, Lewis explains he was previously reincarnated into Eleanor's modern Japan before being reborn into this world. Filled with sudden, overwhelming clarity, Eleanor passionately declares that she absolutely knew they shared a profound cosmic connection. Questioning her remaining resolve, Lewis sharply challenges her on whether she still thinks he will be swayed by the game's protagonist. Countering his lingering doubt, she confidently argues that he is far more easily influenced by the world's scenario than she ever could be. Confronting her hesitations head-on, Lewis directly asks if the restrictive system is the real reason she refuses to fully accept him. Fiercely defending his present, undeniable feelings, Lewis forcefully emphasizes that he is living in the here and now regardless of any rigid system. Standing her ground with equal fire, Eleanor stubbornly insists that she simply cannot accept the predetermined fate laid out for them. Revealing his deepest insecurities, Lewis solemnly confesses his past assumption that a normal human woman would be a far better match for him. Pushing the tense matter further, he critically challenges the practical reality of her eventually settling down peacefully in this magical world. Leaning in dangerously close, Lewis intensely insists that everything will be exponentially easier if she simply admits her true feelings. Overwhelmed by his piercing gaze, Eleanor breathlessly begs Lewis to stop pressing her so relentlessly. Refusing to back down an inch, he smoothly promises that she will finally find total peace once she stops fighting her own desperate desires. Piercing straight through her remaining defenses, Lewis confidently states that no matter her flimsy excuses, she desperately wants to accept him. Offering a deeply tempting escape, he gently suggests that if she cannot accept her feelings, she can just blindly blame everything on him. A highly charged, breathless silence envelopes them as his sinful offer of absolute absolution hangs heavily in the stifling air. Whispering in sheer, vulnerable disbelief, Eleanor softly asks if she can truly place all the heavy faults squarely on his shoulders. Sealing her fading resolve, she finally surrenders completely and whispers a definitive yes to his intoxicating, dangerous proposal. Holding her incredibly tight, Lewis gently asks for absolute confirmation as the very last fragment of her resistance finally crumbles away. Pulling her into a deeply passionate embrace, he declares it utterly pointless to keep agonizing even if their fiery kiss feels like a terrible sin. Their trembling bodies press tightly together as the overwhelming, undeniable passion completely consumes the dimly lit, private space. A breathless, echoing sigh escapes into the shadows as they utterly lose themselves in the forbidden, intoxicating warmth of the moment. The lingering, heavy intimacy softly fades as the narrative violently shifts focus to a completely different, much darker scene. In a harsh, sterile setting, an unknown man coldly observes a bright strand of hair matching the mysterious woman's distinct color. Examining the undeniable evidence, he confidently confirms his mage brother successfully retrieved the rare hair of an A-rank female fairy. Recalling a calculated past encounter, he maliciously notes how he deliberately faked a show of getting close to his mysterious, elusive target. Highlighting a massive, fatal mistake, he coldly recalls how the unsuspecting woman instinctively reacted in fear to the hidden presence of his sword. Connecting all the sinister clues, he definitively deduces the shocking, dangerous truth that the woman is actually a powerful fairy in disguise. Concluding his ruthless investigation, he grimly realizes the corrupt research institute must be looking the other way while a fairy infiltrates human society. The narrative opens quietly as the peaceful sanctuary of daily life settles around them. Soft light drifts across the quiet estate while an atmosphere of gentle stillness lingers. Several months have flown by in a tranquil flash, weaving deep bonds through continuous daily warmth. Quiet moments unfold with effortless grace across the sunlit, comfortable estate halls. Their blossoming dynamic as devoted lovers remains perfectly nestled within their unshakable, gentle routine with Louis. An overwhelming sense of serenity fills her with the blissful hope that these tranquil days might endure forever. Warm sunlight gently spills through the pristine estate windows, wrapping the tranquil home in quiet harmony. Every morning blooms with pure domestic bliss, carrying peaceful and profoundly warm days forward. Serene silence blankets the corridors as each passing hour deepens their shared domestic comfort. Gentle murmurs echo softly within the room while tender concern guides every quiet step. Soft shadows cast a calm glow across the bedchamber as quiet devotion fills the air. Louis steps forward with earnest concern, urgently inquiring about young Lumina's fragile physical state. She turns toward him with a gentle gaze, tenderly conveying the delicate situation at hand. Eleanor softly explains that while Lumina lacks an appetite, she still happily drank the sweet apple tea. Despite sleeping peacefully now, the young girl's stubborn fever sadly refuses to break. The quiet atmosphere thickens with deep emotion as unspoken tenderness and affection build between them. Eleanor affectionately reflects on the precious months that have transformed their affectionate relationship since becoming lovers. Louis playfully pulls her close, candidly admitting his heavy exhaustion after an arduous day of relentless royal duties. He tightens his tender embrace with a needy squeeze, shamelessly demanding that Eleanor spoil and pamper him completely. Louis reveals that the entire nation will observe solemn mourning tomorrow for the Queen's second death anniversary. He drove himself relentlessly to finish all demanding royal preparations ahead of tomorrow's mandatory national grief. The king had loved his late queen devotedly, plunging into profound despair without ever taking a single concubine. With school cancelled for the mourning period, Lumina can rest easily without worrying about missing her classes. Eleanor gently comforts her weary partner, acknowledging how desperately he worked to clear today's overflowing tasks. Louis pauses with a sudden, serious glance, softly calling Eleanor's name as the peaceful mood abruptly shifts. Intense silence blankets the room as their gazes meet, brimming with profound, unspoken gravity. He kindly insists that she rest past noon tomorrow since Lumina is settled and breakfast will not be needed. Eleanor murmurs her heartfelt gratitude, though a lingering question suddenly flickers across her eyes. Breaking the calm atmosphere, Louis boldly announces that they must finally confront an urgent, long-delayed matter. He solemnly admits this crucial conversation has weighed heavily on his mind for an agonizingly long time. Louis firmly insists that the unavoidable truth can no longer wait despite the heavy timing. He reveals that upon rising to court mage, he immediately placed a total ban on a sinister fairy-related medicine. Despite relentless demand from desperate nobles, Louis aggressively petitioned authorities to criminalize its entire production. Eleanor tenses instantly at the word medicine, gripping him tightly as dark chills trace down her spine. Dread tightens in the heavy air as buried horrors slowly crawl back to the surface. Only one horrific fairy-derived concoction exists, forever haunting her kind as their most loathsome and forbidden nightmare. Past humans ruthlessly slaughtered innocent fairies in massive, gruesome numbers just to harvest their bodies for ingredients. Trembling with rising pain, Eleanor urgently demands why Louis is suddenly exhuming such a deeply taboo atrocity. The dark, harrowing history hangs heavily between them as grim revelations demand to be confronted. A heavy silence falls over the chamber as the dark, unspoken truth awaits its final reckoning. Lumina bursts into the room in a sudden panic, furiously yelling at Louis for being an idiot. Overwhelmed by emotion, Lumina lashes out through tearful cries and repeatedly berates her brother. Shock and frantic energy take over as Lumina vehemently protests against Lewis opening up the past. Trembling with distress, the frail young girl stumbles forward in an emotional frenzy. Eleanor rushes forward instantly, wrapping Lumina in a warm embrace to soothe her frantic panic. Eleanor gently comforts the terrified child, urging her to breathe and return to bed. Lumina clings tightly in despair, tearfully begging Eleanor not to abandon her for keeping dark secrets. Sobs rack Lumina's fragile frame as she buries her face deeply into Eleanor's arms. Desperation grips the little girl's heart as she pleads endlessly for Eleanor to stay by her side. Sensing the sheer dread hanging over the untold story, Eleanor decides to postpone the painful conversation. Putting Lumina's fragile well-being first, Eleanor firmly holds off on pressing Lewis for the truth. Eleanor softly asks Lewis to magically cool a towel while she tends to the feverish girl. Lewis focuses his magic in heavy silence, his expression burdened with deep, unspoken sorrow. A once peaceful, small nation had exploded into rapid power through the sudden invention of a sinister medicine. The miraculous drug spread like wildfire across foreign lands, captivating commoners and elite nobles alike. This extraordinary substance possessed the terrifying power to bestow magic upon the powerless. Whispers spread far and wide that this wondrous elixir could cure even the most terminal illnesses. The entire realm became utterly enthralled by this miraculous wonder drug, known to all as Fairy Tale. Beneath its dazzling reputation lay a gruesome, dark secret harvested from the lives of fairies. This forbidden concoction was originally engineered by the prominent Stylia's bloodline. Generations of the Stylia's family profited relentlessly by manufacturing the notorious elixir. Returning to reality, Lewis checks on Eleanor after she finishes putting Lumina to sleep. Eleanor calls out to Lewis with a soft, determined gaze, cutting through the tense atmosphere. Lewis shakes himself from his deep daze, apologizing as he steps forward with the chilled cloth. Gentle understanding warms Eleanor's expression as she reassures him with pure devotion. Eleanor courageously promises that she will never run away and will patiently wait to hear his full story. The tension dissolves into a slightly awkward yet tender silence as they recover their footing. Eleanor brings a refreshing warmth back to the room, smoothly shifting to comforting daily routines. Eleanor cheerfully asks Lewis what side dish he would like packed in his post-holiday lunchbox. Lewis happily requests a second packed lunch, politely asking if she could make one for Claire as well. Surprise flickers across Eleanor's face at the unexpected mention of Claire's name. Eleanor gladly agrees to the request, inquiring if Claire has any particular food dislikes. Lewis explains with a warm smile that Claire had eagerly wanted to taste Eleanor's famous cooking. He warmly reassures her that Claire will eat anything and to simply prepare it with her usual love. Morning arrives with vibrant energy as Eleanor meticulously packs a colorful, delicious bento. Carefully arranged gourmet delicacies fill every compartment of the lovingly prepared meal. Claire inspects the beautifully packed lunchbox with awe, marveling at the sheer variety of vibrant dishes. The dazzling colors and exquisite presentation leave Claire completely stunned and speechless. Taking her first bite, Claire's eyes light up with pure bliss at how remarkably delicious it tastes. Claire savors every single mouthful, utterly enchanted by Eleanor's culinary mastery. Inspecting the meticulously prepared meal, Claire realizes with awe that Eleanor actually crafted it herself instead of using the cafeteria. Overwhelmed by the vibrant presentation, she silently marvels at the sheer quality of the homemade feast. Meanwhile, a stern leader commands the exhausted group to rest properly and brace themselves for tomorrow's grueling trials. Another figure turns to Gil, carefully presenting the stack of vital passes they had just finished collecting. A sudden jolt of confusion strikes the duo as a troubling inconsistency catches their sharp eyes. Tension rises as they grimly acknowledge they absolutely cannot afford to lose the special passes the mage went out of his way to prepare. Panic quickly flares when they definitively confirm that several crucial passes are mysteriously missing from the gathered stack. Despite thoroughly double-checking the count during collection, the baffling disappearance remains an undeniable and frustrating reality. Defeated by the inexplicable loss, the two anxiously brace themselves to face Lewis and offer an honest apology. Shifting focus, a delighted Claire eagerly plots to use this perfect opportunity to get closer to Eleanor by asking for cooking lessons. Filled with newfound enthusiasm, she happily anticipates visiting simply to thank her properly for the incredible lunchbox. Refusing to accept any unspoken defeat, Claire boldly resolves to march directly to the Stylia's estate tonight.